in the early 11th century. In which reign was it? This is how the story begins, not with a name, not with a date, with a question that is also a way of saying that the question does not matter. In which reign was it? The reign was long ago. The reign was in the time of the Heian court, when the capital of Japan was Kyoto, when the world was organized around a palace complex of extraordinary beauty, when the measurement of a person was taken not in strength or wealth, but in the refinement of their sensibility, their command of poetry, the angle at which they wore their robes, the quality of the incense they burned, in their rooms. In which reign was it? It does not matter which reign. It matters only that there was a woman. There was a woman. She was not the highest ranking of the emperor's ladies. The highest ranking were the consorts and the imperial wives, women who came from the great families, whose fathers and brothers and uncles held positions close to the throne, whose elevation to the palace was a transaction as much as a romance, a cementing of alliances, a way of binding the great clans. To the imperial house, she was not one of those. She was a lady-in-waiting of the second rank, a koi, a woman of good family, but not the greatest family, a woman who had come to the palace with her beauty and her grace, and without the political machinery that the great ladies brought with them, and the emperor loved her, not as he was supposed to love, not with the careful distribution of attention that a sovereign owed to all his ladies, the measured visits, the formal poems sent at appropriate occasions, the equal distribution of favor. That kept the peace among the women and the clans behind them. He loved her the way a person loves. When they have found the one thing they did not know they were looking for, completely, without reserve, in a way that made everything else secondary, the other women noticed. Of course they noticed. In the world of the Heian Palace, the ranking of the emperor's favor was not a private matter. Every visit was observed, every poem recorded, every morning departure noted. The women and their attendants, and the attendants' tracked the movements of the emperor, the way weather is tracked, for signs of what was coming, for indications of which way things were moving, and the signs were not ambiguous. He came to her. Again and again he came to her. He passed the rooms of the great ladies. To reach her room, which was in the far wing of the palace, near the Paulownia court, the court of the Kiri tree, the tree whose name would become hers. She would be called the Kiritsubo lady, the lady of the Paulownia court, named for the place she had been given, the place that was far from the center, but where the emperor always went. The other women made her passage difficult. This is recorded in the tale with a kind of quiet precision that does not soften what it describes. The corridors of the palace connected the different wings, and to reach her room, the Kiritsubo lady had to pass through corridors that other women controlled, and those women made sure she knew it. The floors of the corridors were found to have been fouled when she passed through them. Her robes were marked. The doors she needed to pass through were found to be locked at the moment she most needed them open. The cruelties were small, each one deniable, each one the kind of thing that could be attributed to accident or oversight or coincidence, but they accumulated. Day after day, the small cruelties accumulated into something that wore at her, that wore at the brightness of her, the way weather wears at stone. The emperor responded by moving her closer. He displaced another lady from a room near his own quarters and gave that room to the Kiritsubo lady, the nearer room, the room that required less crossing of hostile corridors, the room that said, in the language of palace geography, that she mattered most. This made things worse. The women who had merely been jealous became something harder than jealous. The woman in the palace, who came from the most powerful family of all, the lady of the Kokiden, whose father was the minister of the right, whose position and influence were the most formidable in the court, watched the Kiritsubo lady move to the room near the emperor and felt something that went beyond ordinary court rivalry into something more dangerous, because the Kiritsubo lady was pregnant, and a child born to the emperor's most beloved lady was a child who might grow to threaten the succession. The Kokiden lady already had a son, a fine son, a son who was the presumptive heir, and that son's position was only as secure as his mother's position in the emperor's heart, which was only as secure as the Kiritsubo lady was distant from that heart, and the Kiritsubo lady was not distant. The child was born, a boy, and the boy was, from his first moment, extraordinary. The tale says this with the confidence of a story that knows it is describing someone who will be described for 1,000 years. The child was beautiful, not ordinarily beautiful. Beautifully beautiful, the kind of beautiful that made people stop and look twice, and then look a third time, and still feel that they had not quite seen it, that the beauty exceeded what looking could capture. The emperor held his son and felt something that the tale calls a light beyond what the world usually contains. This is the child's first name, before he has a name. The light that comes into the world and is recognized immediately as different from ordinary light. But light attracts attention. The Kokiden lady saw the child. The court saw the child. The politics of the palace shifted around the child, the way water shifts around a stone placed in a stream, everything adjusting, everything recalculating, everything trying to determine what this new presence meant for the existing arrangements, and the Kiritsubo lady felt the weight of it. She had been fragile before. The corridor cruelties, the long walks through hostile territory, the loneliness of being the most loved, and therefore the most hated. She had been managing it, holding herself together, with the particular effort of someone who has more to lose than strength to protect. After the birth, the effort became harder. The child was 3 years old. When she died in summer. She had asked to be allowed to go home to her mother's house, to the place where she had been, before the palace, before the emperor's love, before all of this. She was allowed to go, and before she could return, she was gone. The emperor's grief was not a private thing. In the world of the Heian court, private things did not quite exist. Everything was observed. Everything was known. The emperor's response to the loss of the Kiritsubo lady was watched by everyone and understood by everyone as the measure of how much she had mattered. She had mattered enormously. He could not attend to his duties. He could not maintain the appointments and the ceremonies and the careful distribution of attention that a sovereign owed to his court. He stayed in his room. He sent poems to her mother, from whom no poems were expected in return, whose grief was at least the equal of his own. The court watched and waited. The Kokiden lady watched and waited. Time passed. This is what time does, even in the Heian palace, even in the world of extraordinary beauty, even in the world of the emperor and his grief. Time passed, and someone came to the emperor and told him that there was a princess, a daughter of the previous emperor, a woman who had not yet come to the palace, who was, they said, of a beauty that recalled the Kiritsubo lady. Not the same. Nothing could be the same, but something in the quality of her presence, something in the way she carried herself, something in the way the air around her seemed to have a particular quality of light. The emperor asked to see her. She was called Hujitsubo, the lady of the wisteria court. She came to the palace. She was given a room near the emperor's quarters. She was given the attention that the Kiritsubo lady had been given. She was given the place in the emperor's heart that had been empty since the summer of the child's 3rd year. The court approved. Hujitsubo came from the highest family. She had the rank and the connections that the Kiritsubo lady had lacked. Her elevation was not a disruption of the palace's order, but a confirmation of it. The ladies who had resented the Kiritsubo lady found in Hujitsubo someone they could accept, and the child, the small boy who had been 3 years old when his mother died, the boy who had been told, as children are told, that she had gone away, that she would not be coming back, that the world was now different in this one particular way from the world he had known. He was brought to the palace to be raised near his father. He was told that there was a new lady, that this new lady was like his mother in certain ways, that it would be appropriate to treat her with affection. He went to see Hujitsubo with the particular hope of a child who has been told that something lost has been found again in a different form. He saw her, and the hope was not exactly answered. She was not his mother. She could not be his mother, but she was something. She was someone who held in her presence a quality that recalled something he could not quite remember, but could not quite forget. The child was 4 years old, 5 years old, 6. He grew up in the palace, near his father and near Hujitsubo, and the feeling he had when he looked at her was the feeling of reaching toward something that was always just beyond reach. The child was beautiful. Everyone who saw him said so. The attendants said so. The visitors to the palace said so. The foreign envoys who came in the 7th year of his life said so in terms that translated across every language as the same thing. A Korean astrologer came to read the child's fortune. He looked at the boy the way a person looks at something they have been trained to read, and found everything they expected, and more than they expected. He said, "This child should have been born a king. He has the face of a king. He has the bearing of a king. He has what kings are made of." He said it as a fact, rather than a flattery. He said it the way you say something, when you are trained to see it, and what you see is undeniable. But the child was not going to be king. His mother's position had prevented it. The politics of the court had prevented it. He was to be given a family name, the name of Genji, the name of the commoner's clan, and sent into the world of the court as a servant of the throne rather than an heir to it. He was given the name Genji. He was given a wife, the daughter of the minister of the left, a suitable match, a marriage that placed him in the structure of the court, in the way that marriages were used to place people in the structure of things. He was 12 years old when he came of age, 12 years old when he became, in the language of the court, a man, and in the ceremony of his coming of age, as the cap was placed on his head, and the poems were exchanged, and the wine was drunk, and the formalities observed, that transformed a boy into a man. In the eyes of the court, he looked across the room at Hujitsubo. She was not quite his mother. She was not quite a stranger. She was the woman who had been placed in the space left by his mother's death, and who had lived there through all the years of his growing. He looked at her, and what he felt was something the story will carry forward for all its remaining pages, something that will drive the next decade of his life, something that will shape him into what he becomes. Not innocent love, not the simple feeling of a son for a mother, something more complicated, something that will not resolve, something that will reach forward into the future and pull consequences behind it, the way a stone pulled across water pulls ripples in its wake. He looked at her. The ceremony continued. The new man bowed his head and received the blessing of the court, and the Genji story began. The second chapter. Hahakigi, the broom tree. There is a tree in the old stories of Japan called the Hahakigi, the broom tree. It grows in the province of Shinano, in the mountains of the interior, and the stories say that from a distance it looks like a broom standing upright, like something definite and present and reachable, but when you walk toward it, when you leave the distance and enter the near, the tree disappears. What looked clear from far away becomes nothing as you approach. The nearer you get, the less there is to see. This is the tree whose name gives the second chapter its title, and this is the chapter in which Genji learns that some things are like that. He was 17. 5 years had passed since the ceremony of his coming of age. 5 years in which he had been the most admired young man at court, the most beautiful, the most accomplished, the one everyone watched when he entered a room, because the room changed. When he entered it, became brighter, became the kind of room worth being in. He had a wife. He had had a wife since he was 12. Aoi, the daughter of the minister of the left, a woman of the highest family, a woman of great dignity, a woman 4 years older than himself, who met his approach with the particular coolness of someone who had been told they were supposed to love someone and had found the telling insufficient. He spent as little time as possible at her house. He found reasons to be at the palace. He had duties that kept him in the city. He was, in the polite language of the court, a young husband who had not yet settled into his marriage. What kept him from settling was not Aoi's coolness, though that was part of it. What kept him from settling was Hujitsubo. She was still there, still in the palace, still the emperor's most beloved lady, still the person whose presence in a room made him aware of everything that was not resolved in him, everything that reached toward something it could not have. It was a rainy night in early summer, the long rains of the 5th month, the rains that come in from the sea and settle over the capital and do not leave for days, that turn the gardens to green labyrinths and fill the canals and make the city smell of wet earth and pine. Genji was at the palace. He had night duty, the obligation of the courtier, to remain near the emperor during the hours of darkness. His room was the room that had been his mother's room, the room of the Paulonia court, the room he had been given, because the emperor could not let go of the space where she had been. His friend Tunochujo came. Tunochujo, the head captain, the son of the minister of the left, which made him the brother of Genji's wife Aoi, which made him family, in the complicated way that court relationships made everything family. They were friends beyond the family connection, friends in the way that two people, who are both extraordinary, and who both know it, can be friends with the particular warmth of mutual recognition and mutual rivalry held in careful balance. Tunachujo came, and two others came with him, the left equerry, and the secretary of ceremonial, and the four of them settled into Genji's room, with the rain outside and the night ahead, and nothing particular to do but talk. They talked about women. This is the famous conversation, the ranking of women, the rain night rating, Amayo no Shinasadame, the classification of women by a rainy night. The left equerry began it. He spoke with the confidence of a man who has thought carefully about something and arrived at conclusions he is willing to defend. He said, women can be divided into three categories: the highest, the middle, the lowest. The highest class of women, he said, were the daughters of the great families, the women who had been raised in the innermost rooms of the grandest houses, whose every quality had been shaped by the attention of 1,000 years of refinement. These women were perfect, or rather, they appeared perfect, because with the highest women, you could never quite see them. They were always behind screens, behind curtains, behind the layers of ceremony and protocol that kept them separate from ordinary seeing. A man could love a high-ranking woman for years and never know whether the perfection he imagined matched anything real. The lowest class of women, he said, were barely worth discussing. What could be said of them that would be interesting? They existed, they had their lives, but they were not the subject of a conversation between men of the court. The middle class of women, he said, were the interesting ones, the women of middling rank, the daughters of minor officials, the women whose families had once been great and had declined, or whose families had never quite reached the highest level, but had maintained enough quality to produce daughters worth knowing. These women, he said, were visible. You could actually see them. They had personalities that were not entirely hidden by ceremony. They had particular ways of being that distinguished them from each other. They could surprise you. And there was nothing more interesting, he said, than being surprised. Tunachujo agreed about the middle women. He had a story to tell. There had been a woman he had known, a quiet woman, not beautiful in the obvious way, but with something in her that repaid attention, the kind of woman who was more on the second meeting than on the first, and more on the third than the second, who accumulated toward you, rather than presenting herself all at once. He had visited her, he had written to her, he had developed something that might, in the court's careful language, be called an attachment, and then the visits had grown less frequent. He had other obligations, other claims on his time. the way things were at court, the way a young man's life distributed itself across too many demands, the attachment had loosened without anyone quite deciding to loosen it. The woman had said nothing. She had not complained. She had not sent bitter letters. She had not made demands. When he came less often, she simply received him less often, with the same quiet quality she had always had. He had found this admirable, and also unsettling. A woman who said nothing, when you gave her reason to say something, was either very patient or very still inside, and he could not tell which, and the not telling was its own kind of pull. She had disappeared eventually, left the city. He did not know where she had gone. He had a child by her. The child had gone with her. He thought about them sometimes, the quiet woman and the child, existing somewhere he couldn't reach. Genji listened to all of this. He was younger than the others. He had less experience of the middle class of women than they did. The women he had known were the women of the palace, the women of the highest rank, the women whose qualities were real, but hidden behind the screens and the protocol. He listened and he thought about Fujitsubo. He thought about the screen that always stood between them, the ceremony that always intervened, the distance that was maintained by the rules of the court, and that he could never quite cross, no matter how much, everything in him wanted to cross it. Maybe the middle class of women were the answer to Fujitsubo. Maybe what he needed was someone who could be seen, someone who was actually there, someone whose reality matched the imagining. The next day he had an excuse. Direction taboo, kata tagai, the system of lucky and unlucky directions that governed movement in the Heian world. On certain days, the malevolent spirit of a particular direction made it dangerous to travel that way. A person who needed to travel in the blocked direction had to first spend the night in a different direction and then proceed to their destination. The following morning, Genji needed to travel in the direction that was currently blocked by this inconvenient spirit. He needed, therefore, to spend the night somewhere in the other direction. The house of the Ki no Kami was in the appropriate direction. The Ki no Kami was a young official of exactly the middling kind. The previous night's conversation had described. His house was the kind of house the conversation had described, and in his house, staying as a guest while her husband was away, in his provincial posting was a woman named Utsusemi. The name means the empty cicada shell, the shell that a cicada leaves behind when it transforms, the transparent husk that clings to the bark of the tree. After the living thing has gone, she would earn this name by the end of the chapter. Genji arrived at the Ki no Kami's house in the late afternoon. He was shown to his room. He was given food and attended to, and through the screens, through the thin partitions, of a house that was not built for the absolute privacy of the palace. He heard women's voices, the women of the house, talking in the room beyond, the sound of women talking when they do not know anyone important is listening, the sound of women being themselves. One voice was different, more careful than the others, more deliberate, the voice of someone who had learned to say less than she thought, to measure her words against the space available for words. He sent someone to find out who was there. He was told, Utsusemi, the wife of the Io no Suke, staying here while her husband administered a distant province, a woman of good family who had come down in the world by marrying below her original station. He went to her room that night. She was asleep, or she appeared to be asleep. The screens were thin. The house was quiet. The rain was still falling outside. He went to her. She was not willing. The tale records this plainly in the way it records things that are difficult to record without dwelling and without concealing. She was not willing. He went to her anyway. This is what happened. And then morning came, and he left her, and returned to his part of the house. And the night ended, and the direction taboo expired, and he had what he had come for, and she had what she had not asked for, and the tale moved on. But here is what matters. She did not pretend. After that night, after what had happened, she did not receive him, as though nothing had happened, or as though what had happened was what she had wanted. She refused him. He sent letters. The letters were the language of the court, beautiful letters, letters that said, in the delicate, indirect language that the court had developed for saying difficult things beautifully, that he thought about her, that he wanted to come again, that the night had meant something to him. She sent back what were required: brief poems, polite, correct, completely closed. She had her own language, and her language said, I know what you are. I know what that night was. I am a married woman. I will not pretend otherwise. I will not come toward you the way you want me to. He found this more interesting than anything he had expected. He had expected the usual. He had expected the woman to respond the way women responded when Genji paid attention to them, with gratitude, with availability, with the quiet shift of someone who has been seen by someone important and who understands what that means for the way they think about themselves. Utsusemi did not shift. She remained. She held her position. She refused him with a consistency that could not be explained by dignity alone. She was also afraid. She was also struggling. The poem she sent back gave glimpses of this, the effort required to maintain the refusal against something that was real and pulling. But she maintained it. He went to the house again. He went with a different excuse. He found his way to the room adjacent to hers. He waited She knew he was there. She understood what his coming meant. She had been waiting for it, the way a person waits, for something they know is coming and can neither welcome nor stop. She slipped away. She left the room while he waited. She moved through the dark house without making a sound, and went to sleep in another room, leaving him with an empty space. Where she had been, he found her robe, the robe she had been wearing. Left behind in the room she had vacated, like the shell of a cicada, the transparent husk, the form without the living thing. He held the robe. He could smell her in the fabric. He could feel the shape of her in the cloth. Everything of her that she had left. By leaving nothing of herself, he made a poem. He compared himself to a man lost in the forest of the broom tree, approaching what seemed real and present, and finding it gone, finding only the evidence that something had been there. Utsusemi, the empty shell, the name she would carry through the rest of the story, the name that was given to her by the shape of what she had done. She had transformed and left the shell behind and moved to where he could not follow. She appears again later, not often. The tale returns to her at a particular moment, years later, when the shape of both their lives has changed in ways neither of them could predict. But that is later. Now she is the woman who refused Genji when no one refused Genji, who held her place when the most beautiful and most desired man at court came to her room in the dark, who found the way to say no without saying anything, and to make the no more eloquent than any yes could have been. The broom tree, seen from a distance, present, approached, gone. She was the first woman who taught Genji. That distance was sometimes the only honest measure. The fourth chapter, Yugao, the evening face. There is a flower called Yugao in Japan, the evening face, a white flower that opens at dusk and closes before morning, a flower of the fence lines and the walls, of the modest parts of the city, where the great families do not live, where the gardens are smaller and the houses are closer together, and the flowers that grow there are not the formal flowers of the great houses, but something more accidental, more quietly there, more the kind of thing you notice when you are not looking for anything and the evening is coming on, and the white flower catches the last light from the other side of a fence. Genji was 17. He was on his way to visit his old nurse, the nurse who had fed him when he was too young to remember, the woman who had held him in the time before he knew what holding was. She was ill. She lived in the part of the city called Gojo, the Fifth Ward, a part of the city that Genji did not usually have reason to pass through. That was not the part of the city where people of his rank usually found themselves. He went in a carriage that was not obviously his, an ordinary carriage. He went without the full ceremony. of his usual comings and goings. He had learned by now the particular pleasure of moving through the city as something other than what he was, of being present in places where he was not expected, where the usual calculations did not apply, where people who did not know who was passing looked at him with ordinary eyes. At his nurse's house he found her improved, better than he had feared, sitting up, glad to see him, the particular gladness of someone who has been ill and did not expect, the person they most hoped to see. He sat with her, he talked with her, he asked the questions you ask when you have been away and the person you are visiting has been close to the edge and has come back, and then through the screens, through the gaps in the fence that separated his nurse's modest house from the house next door, he saw a flower, white, on a vine along the fence, opening in the approaching evening, the Yugao flower, the evening face. He asked what it was called. A servant said, Yugao, the evening face, the flower that opens at dusk. He asked someone to bring him one. The servant went to the fence to reach for a flower, and from the other side of the fence, from the house he could not see into, a small girl appeared. She held out a fan. Put the flower on this, she said. The fan was white, and on the white fan was writing, a poem, in a hand that was careful and graceful, and that belonged to someone who was not, by the existence of that hand, an ordinary person of that part of the city. The poem said, I wonder whose face this is, this evening face, reflecting the white dew's light. He was interested. He had been interested before. In Utsusemi, in Hujitsubo, in the theoretical middle-class women of the rainy night conversation. But this was different. This was someone who had reached toward him first, someone who had taken the occasion of the flower, and the fan, and the small girl sent to the fence, and had made of it something unexpected, a poem, a question, a reaching. He returned the fan with a poem of his own. He went home. He thought about the fan. He sent someone to find out who lived there. She became known as Yugao, the evening face. She was not her own name. She was named for the flower, by Genji's attendants, and by the story that would be told about her, the story that was already being shaped, by the fact that she was the person who sent the fan with the poem at the moment of the evening flower. Her real name was different. Her real history was different. She had been before the house on Gojo, someone else, someone connected to the court, someone who had had a different kind of life before circumstances had brought her to the modest house where the Yugao grew along the fence. But Genji did not know this yet. He only knew the fan, the poem, the small girl, the white flower in the evening. He went to her house. He went in disguise, or near enough to disguise, without the full display of who he was, Without the name, he went as someone who was interested in the woman, who sent poems on fans to strangers at fences. She received him. She was gentle, the gentleness of someone who does not push anything away and does not pull anything toward her, but simply is there in the room with a quality of presence that was unlike anything he had encountered in the palace. The palace women were formed by the palace. Even their gentleness was shaped by the requirements of court life, the need to maintain position, to manage relationships, to always be aware of the audience. That was always present. Yugao had no audience. She had no position to maintain. She was simply herself, whatever self that was. She held it quietly, and the quietness of it was something Genji had not known. He was looking for. He kept his name from her. This was unusual, or rather, it was the kind of unusual. That was also a strategy, the kind of concealment. That was a way of maintaining the particular quality of what was happening between them, the quality of two people who are only what they are in each other's presence, rather than what the world has made them. She kept her name from him too, or rather she did not offer it. She did not explain herself. She was there. She was gentle. She was the evening face. What more was needed? He came often, more often than was usual for him. He was known for spreading his attention across many claims, for the careful distribution of his presence among the women who hoped for it. But he came to Yugao's house on Gojo more often than the pattern required. Something about the house, something about her quietness, something about the absence of the court and its calculations. Then came the night when he took her away. He had been thinking about it. A house he knew, a place outside the city, a place where the two of them could be somewhere entirely other than anywhere they had ever been. He wrapped her in a robe and carried her to a carriage. In the dark, she came without protest, the docility of someone who has decided or who has given up deciding or who has found that what is happening exceeds the categories that deciding applies to. They came to the old house. It was a house that had been abandoned, a property that belonged to someone who was no longer using it. Old gardens gone to wilderness, rooms that smelled of disuse, and something older than disuse, the particular atmosphere of a place that has been inhabited by enough history that the history lingers, that the air holds something of everyone who has ever been there. The house had that. The house had more than he expected. They spent the night together. The night was what it was. The place had its atmosphere. The old house in the wilderness garden had whatever it had that old abandoned houses have, the accumulated presence of what has happened in them and what has been left behind. In the deep hours before dawn, Genji woke. He felt something in the room, a presence, not a person, not anything he could name, in the ordinary vocabulary of the world, something that was in the room that had not been in the room when he fell asleep, something with a quality of attention, something looking at them. He saw a figure near Yugao, bending over her, a figure of a woman whose quality was wrong, whose quality was the quality of something that should not be there. The figure looked at him, and Genji was afraid, in a way he had not known. He could be afraid with the particular fear of a person who has encountered something that is outside the categories of what he knows. Yugao cried out. She cried out, and then she was still. The particular stillness that is different from sleep, the stillness that is the absence of everything that had been moving before, the stillness that Genji recognized immediately and would not have recognized a moment earlier. He called her name. He called her several times. He reached for her. She was warm still, and then less warm. She did not answer. The attendant called for lights. In the lamplight, Yugao looked as she had looked when she was asleep, or almost as she had looked. Almost. Genji held her. He called her name again. He said things to her that the tale records with the particular delicacy it uses for moments that are too close to the center of things to describe directly. She did not respond by the time the lamps were brought, and the attendants were summoned, and the frantic attempts at help were attempted and found insufficient. Yugao was gone. What happened? The tale does not say directly. Genji believes it was the spirit of the abandoned house, something that had been waiting there in the old rooms in the wilderness garden, waiting for an occasion, and found this one. Others, reading the tale, have said it was something else, that the figure Genji saw was the living spirit of the Rokuzyo lady. The Rokuzyo lady, the woman Genji had been visiting when the summer began, the proud and brilliant widow, the woman of rank and accomplishment, the woman who loved Genji with a love that was too large and too intelligent and too aware of itself to be comfortable, the woman who knew perhaps that he had found someone in a house on Gojo and was going there more often than he came to her, whether her spirit left her sleeping body and traveled to the old house to do what was done there, is something the tale refuses to confirm. It says only what Genji saw. The figure, the attention, the looking, and Yugao not waking. He grieved. He fell ill with grief, the body and the mind breaking down together, in the way that happens when something is taken, that the body had accepted as permanent. He lay in his room. He could not eat. He could not receive visitors properly. He could not maintain the face that court life required of everyone who moved through it. Later he learned who she was. His attendant told him, the woman on Gojo, the woman who sent the poem on the fan She had been before that house the lover of his friend Tunachujo, the quiet woman, the woman who disappeared, the woman Tunachujo had told them about. On the rainy night of the conversation about women, she had left him. She had taken their daughter and gone somewhere Tunachujo could not find, and she had ended in the house on Gojo, and she had become the evening face, and she had gone the way the evening face goes. Before morning, before the light returns, the daughter was somewhere, Tunochujo's daughter, Genji's lost love's daughter, a child who did not know yet what her origins were or what her life was part of. She would appear again, later, in a different part of the story, with a different name, in circumstances neither Genji nor Tunochujo could have predicted. From the rainy night conversation, when women were discussed as categories rather than as the specific, particular, irreplaceable people they turned out to be, the evening face, the flower that opens at dusk, that blooms in the ordinary parts of the city, that is there when you are not looking for it, and catches the last light, and is gone before morning. Some things cannot be held. Some things exist only in the quality of their passing. The flower that opens at evening is the flower that closes before dawn. Both are true. The opening and the closing. Both are the flower. Yugao knew this, or she lived it, without needing to know it. She was the evening face. She opened. She was present. She was gone. And the name the story gave her was the name that said exactly that, in the language of flowers, that the court understood, better than any other language, what is beautiful because it does not last. The 5th chapter, Wakamurasaki, Young Lavender. Genji was 18. He was ill. The illness was the kind that the Heian world called okori, a fever that came and went in cycles, that would withdraw for a few days, and then return, that could not be managed by the ordinary means available to a young man, with the full resources of the imperial court at his disposal. He went to the northern hills, Kitayama, the mountains north of the capital, the place where the monks lived, in the clean air above the city, where the rivers ran cold, and the trees were old, and the particular kind of healing that could not be found in the palace might perhaps be found. He went for the incantations, the prayers of a holy man whose reputation had reached the palace, and whose skills, it was said, could address what the palace doctors could not address. He went, and the incantations were performed, and the illness showed signs of improvement, and Genji rested in the mountain air and looked out at the landscape, and recovered slowly, and then on the 3rd day, bored and restless, he went walking. He went further than he intended. The path wound along the hillside, and the air was good, and the particular quality of the light in the mountains at that hour was the quality of light That makes a person walk further than they planned. He came to a small house, a modest house with a fence of brushwood, the kind of fence that is not trying to keep anything out so much as it is trying to mark a boundary, to say, here is where inside begins. Through the fence he could see a garden, not the formal garden of the great houses, the raked and tended landscape of deliberate beauty, a less deliberate garden, a garden where things grew because they had been planted, and because the soil allowed it, and because someone tended them with affection rather than formality. He stopped. Through the gaps in the fence, he could see into the garden, and beyond the garden, into the dim interior of the house. There were nuns inside, women who had taken religious vows. He could hear their voices. He could see their gray robes moving in the interior light. And then he saw the child. She was perhaps 10 years old. She was in the garden, running across the garden, small and quick, in the purposeful way of a child who has seen something and is going toward it. With complete commitment, she stopped. She looked behind her. She said something to the other children with the natural authority of a child who is used to being followed. Her face. Genji looked at her face through the gaps in the fence, and the looking was like a blow. Not because she was beautiful, though she was beautiful. Not because of anything he could have named precisely in the moment of seeing, but because she looked like Hujitsubo. Not exactly. She was a child. Her face was the face of a child, round and unformed, not yet the face that age and experience would eventually make of it, but in the quality of it, in the particular arrangement of the features, in something about the way the light fell on her. That was the same quality as the light on Hujitsubo, the same feeling of looking at something that the world had arranged with particular care. He stayed at the fence longer than was appropriate. He watched her play. He listened to the voices inside. He was performing, in miniature, the same act he had performed 100 times in the palace, the act of looking at Hujitsubo from a distance, through screens, through the obstacles that the court arranged between himself and the thing he wanted. Only the obstacle now was a fence of brushwood, and the thing he was looking at was a child. He learned who she was. He asked his attendant. His attendant made inquiries. The answer came back, in the form that answers often came back in the Heian world, through a chain of people who each knew one link of it. The child was the daughter of the Hyobukyo no Miya, the prince of the Ministry of War, who was the brother of Hujitsubo, Hujitsubo's niece. The blood relationship that explained the resemblance, the line that ran from Hujitsubo's family through her brother to this child playing in the garden of the house on the northern hills. Genji spoke to the abbot of the monastery The abbot was the great uncle of the child, a holy man of high reputation who had come to the mountains and made his life there, and who knew the family of the woman in the house below. The child's story was this: her mother had been a woman who caught the eye of the prince and was loved by him for a time, but the prince had a proper wife, a wife of rank and position, who did not welcome a rival in her husband's affections. The mother had struggled, the pressure of the wife's displeasure, the difficulty of her position. She had fallen ill with the particular illness of someone whose circumstances are working against their health. She had died. The child was 10 years old, and her grandmother, the old nun in the house below, was raising her. Genji offered to be the child's guardian. The abbot politely declined. The child was too young for the kind of relationship a young man of Genji's position might have in mind. Genji said he had no such intention. He meant, he said, only to be a support to the child, a guardian, someone who could ensure that her future was secure. The abbot was polite about this. The abbot did not quite believe it, but he was polite. Genji came back down the mountain. He recovered from his illness. He returned to the city, and he did not forget the child. He thought about her, the way he thought about Hujitsubo, which was constantly, which was with the particular persistence of a feeling that had nowhere to go, and therefore went everywhere. The face through the fence, the resemblance, the relationship, the child who was connected by blood to the woman he could not have. In the same spring, Hujitsubo left the palace. She was ill. She went to her family's house to recover, and Genji, knowing she was there, outside the palace walls, in a house rather than the palace, in a place that was slightly more accessible than the innermost rooms of the emperor's court, went to her. He found her lady-in-waiting, a woman named Omibu, who knew the situation, and who was in the way of ladies-in-waiting who know impossible situations, both sympathetic and unwilling to be entirely responsible for what happened. She helped him. She arranged the meeting. She found the gap in the night where the meeting could happen. He came to Hujitsubo. He was there, in the room with her, in the real room, not the imagined room, not the memory of the room, or the hope of the room, but the actual room, with the actual woman, who had been the center of his life since he was 4 years old, and looked at her across the ceremony of his coming of age. The tale moves through this quickly. It does not dwell in the detail. It says what happened, with the elliptical brevity of something being said that cannot be said directly. They were together. This was the thing that was not supposed to happen. This was the thing that had happened. Hujitsubo went back to the palace. She went back changed, carrying something she had not carried. When she left, she was pregnant. She knew what this meant. The child would be born. The child would be the emperor's child. In the eyes of the world, the emperor's child. In the genealogy, the emperor's child. In every record and every ceremony. That marked the child's existence, but Fujitsubo would know, and Genji would know, and Omibu would know, and the secret would be the three of them, and the weight of it would be carried from that moment forward by all three of them in their own ways. The emperor was happy. He received the news of the pregnancy with the joy of a man who loves the woman who is carrying his child and believes completely in what he is being told. The joy of the emperor, the guilt of Fujitsubo, the particular combination of guilt and hunger in Genji, all three at the same time, all three real, all three carried forward into everything that comes after. And in autumn the grandmother died, the old nun on the northern hills, the woman who had been raising the child. She died as people die, at the moment when her absence would most change things. The child was alone, or nearly alone. She had attendants. She had the house, but she did not have the person who had been the center of her daily existence, the person who had held the shape of her life by being present in it. The girl's father, the prince who was Fujitsubo's brother, was preparing to take his daughter in, to bring her to his house, to give her a place in his household. His wife would be there, his proper wife, the wife who had made the child's mother's life difficult, the wife who would make, one could reasonably predict, the child's life difficult too. Genji acted. The night before the father came for the child, Genji came for her first. He came in a carriage in the dark. He came to the house on the hill. That was quieter now, without the grandmother. He came and he found the child, and he told her she was coming with him. She was frightened. The tale says so clearly. She did not know this person. She knew he had visited. She knew her grandmother had spoken of him. But she was a child, and this was the middle of the night, and a person she barely knew was telling her to come. She came. Her nurse came with her. They went to Genji's house, the Nizyoin, his own house in the city, and the child was brought inside, and given a room, and shown the things in the room, and found eventually that she was not in a frightening place, but in a beautiful one. The dolls, the paintings, the things that had been arranged in the room for her arrival, the things that said, in the language of objects carefully chosen, that this was a place that had been thinking about what she would like. She was 10 years old. He was 18. The tale is honest about what this was, and what it was not. It was not what it would later become. She was too young for that. He understood this, or the better part of him understood it. What it was at this moment was something else, something that does not have a simple name. He had brought her here because she looked like Fujitsubo, because she was connected to Fujitsubo, because the having of her nearby was a way of having something of the person he could not have. He had also brought her here because the alternative was worse, the house of the father and the difficult wife, the position of a child whose mother was not the proper wife. He had brought her here to protect her. Both things were true. The desire and the protection were the same action. She began to trust him, slowly, with the caution of a child who has been moved from one place to another by circumstances she did not choose, with the particular openness of a child who is also, beneath the caution, ready to be won. He drew pictures for her. He told her stories. He sat with her while she played, the way children play, with the complete absorption that adults can only observe and never quite participate in. He called her Murasaki, the young lavender, not her real name, a name that connected her to Fujitsubo, whose name meant the wisteria court, whose color was purple, whose family line ran through her to this child, the purple of the wisteria and the young lavender of the field, the same color, the same family, the same quality of light, in a face he could not stop looking at. This is who she will be for the rest of the story. Murasaki no Yue, the lady of the lavender, the woman who will be raised from this child into the person who will become the most important person in Genji's life. Not yet, not for years, for now she is the child in the autumn house drawing pictures and not knowing what she has been brought into. The story is honest about this too, about what she does not know, about the shape of what is coming that she cannot yet see. She draws her pictures, she plays her games, she learns the things he teaches her. She looks at him with the eyes of a child who has decided this person can be trusted, and Genji looks at her and sees Fujitsubo and sees someone who is not Fujitsubo and sits with the particular complexity of wanting two things at once that cannot both be had, and having found a way to have something that is neither and both. Outside the city continues. The autumn deepens. The hills where he found her are changing color. The world is moving forward in its ordinary way, and inside the Nizyoin, a child draws pictures, and a young man watches, and the story that will unfold from this is already decided by what they are to each other in this room on this autumn evening. The 6th chapter, Suetsumuhana, the safflower. There is a kind of beauty the Heian world prizes above all others, the beauty of refinement, the beauty that comes from centuries of careful attention to every detail of how one lives, the right poem at the right moment, The right color combination in the robes, the right way of holding a brush, the right scent on the sleeve. Genji had absorbed this understanding through every moment of his life. He had grown up among people for whom this kind of beauty was the primary measure of a person. He was himself its most perfect expression, and so when he heard about a woman who was rumored to have this quality, a princess living in neglected circumstances, her father dead, her household reduced, but she herself said to be of a refinement, that the reduced circumstances had not diminished. He was interested. He sought her out in the way that Genji sought things out, which was with persistence. That had the quality of a game, but the intensity of something more serious. He sent poems. He arranged to be near her house. He found intermediaries who could carry his messages and bring back whatever she sent. What she sent back was slow in coming, and difficult to read, and not quite what he expected. He went to her house. He went in the dark, as he went to all houses in the dark, the particular anonymity of the unlit hours that the Heian world used as the medium for the kinds of encounters that needed to happen. Without the full weight of daylight identity, she was there, he was there, and the night was what nights were, between a man who wanted something and a woman who did not refuse. In the morning, the light came. He looked at her. She was not what he had imagined. The tale describes her with the particular honesty it reserves for things it finds instructive. She was tall, extremely tall by the standards of the court, where women were expected to be compact, to fold themselves into. The layered robes and the screens and the curtains, with a quality of contained elegance. She was not contained. She overflowed. Her face was long, longer than the ideal, and at the center of her face was a nose, a remarkable nose, a nose whose length exceeded what noses were generally permitted, and at the tip of this remarkable nose was a redness, a persistent redness, the color of a safflower, the Suetsumuhana, the flower whose tip is dipped in red. Genji looked at her in the cold morning light that showed everything clearly, and felt the gap between what he had imagined and what was there. He did not abandon her. This is one of the things the tale notes about him. For all his inconstancy, for all the ways he moved, from one woman to another, and distributed his attention across too many claims, there were women he did not abandon. The safflower princess was not beautiful by the court's measures. She was not witty. She did not have the quick intelligence that the court valued in the women it admired most. She was slow and deliberate, and a little lost, the woman of a ruined house, who had not been properly taught the arts of navigation that court life required. He kept her. He found her a house. He made sure she was not entirely destitute. He visited less often than she hoped, but he did not forget her. He was, in his way, kind. The tale appreciates this about him. It notes the kindness. Alongside the vanity and the desire, it holds both. The man who could not help himself, with women he found beautiful, and the man who could not abandon, the woman who was not what he had hoped for. The seventh chapter, Momijiga, the maple viewing. The emperor arranged a great celebration, a performance of autumn dances, a viewing of the red maple leaves, the occasion of the 50th birthday of an elder retired emperor, which required, in the elaborate etiquette of the Heian world, a ceremony of impressive scale. Genji would dance. He and Tuno Chujo together, the two most brilliant young men at court, performing the ancient dance called Segaiha, the waves of the blue sea, a dance whose demands were the demands of everything the court valued, grace and precision, and the quality of making the difficult look effortless. The rehearsal was first, a private performance in the palace for the emperor and his ladies, including Hujitsubo, who was expecting the child and could not attend the public ceremony, but for whom the emperor arranged this private viewing. Genji danced the Seigaiha. He danced it in the autumn garden under the maple trees that had turned from green to the particular colors of their turning, red and orange and the yellow, that is almost gold, the colors that the Japanese saw then and see now as the most beautiful of all the colors the world produces. He danced, and the tale reaches for language adequate to what the dance was. It says the dance was beyond description. It says the autumn light on the moving figure in the perfect robes was the kind of thing that made people feel the world had been made partly for this moment. The Kokiden lady, the woman who had driven Genji's mother to her death with cruelties, the woman who had always opposed him, even she was affected. She said the gods themselves would want to take him. She said it as a criticism, as a warning about excessive beauty, about the danger of being more beautiful than mortals should be. But everyone who heard her heard also that she was moved, even his enemy, even the person who most wanted to find him diminished. Hujitsubo watched from behind her screens. She watched the man. Who was the father of the child she was carrying? She watched him dance, with the full force of what he was, the beauty and the grace and the particular quality of someone who has been given every gift and who uses them without waste. She thought, if there were no complication between us, if I could see this simply, without guilt, without the weight of what we have done, I would enjoy this without reservation. But there was the complication. There was the child. There was the emperor watching, with the joy of a man who does not know what he is watching and would be destroyed if he knew. The guilt was the price of the beauty. The beauty was the reason for the guilt. Both were real. Both were hers. She sat behind her screen and held both of them in the careful silence of a woman who has decided that silence is the only honest response to a situation that has no honest response available. The child was born, a boy, beautiful, looking, everyone said, exactly like Genji. The emperor received the news with joy so complete that he did not notice what those who knew the secret could not stop noticing. He saw his son in the child's face. He saw Genji. He was happy. Genji looked at the child he could never acknowledge, the child who would be the emperor's son, the child who would grow up calling Genji his older brother rather than his father. He felt something. The tale does not name directly something that was guilt and love and the particular grief of a person who has what they wanted and cannot have it in any form that can be used. The 8th chapter, Hanaen, the flower feast, spring, the cherry blossoms. The court celebrated spring with the ceremony it brought to all the beautiful things, which was the ceremony of gathering and looking and composing poems about what was being seen. The blossoms were at their height. The palace gardens were the particular pink-white of cherry blossoms at their most present, before the wind takes them, before the rain comes, in the brief window, when they are exactly what they are, no more and no less, the thing that the Japanese called the most beautiful, because it did not last. Genji danced again. He and Tunochujo performed in the afternoon light, under the blossoms, and the afternoon was the afternoon that the cherry blossoms required, golden and clear, and already beginning to be what came after. After the ceremony in the evening, Genji wandered. He was a little drunk, the wine of the feast, the particular loosening, that wine and blossoms, and the beauty of the afternoon, together produced in a young man who was always looking for something he had not found yet. He followed a sound, a voice, a woman's voice, singing to herself in one of the unoccupied wings of the palace, in the rooms that belonged to the Kokiden side, the side of his enemies, the side of the family that had opposed him since his mother's death. He should not have followed it. He knew he should not have followed it. This is the knowledge that the tale records about him, the knowledge he had that he did not act on. He followed the voice. She was singing about the spring night, about the moon, about the quality of a night that was neither too bright nor too dark, the hazy moon of spring, the Oborozukyo, the misty moon night. He heard the song and knew. What kind of person could sing it the quality of the voice, the quality of the song, someone young, someone of the court, someone who had the art of making a song out of what the night was. He stepped into the room where she was singing. She was surprised. She called for the other women, who should have been nearby. They were not nearby. She was alone with this person who had followed her voice into the room. He told her not to be afraid. He told her he had followed the music. He spoke to her with the voice he had practiced. In all the nights of all the years, the voice of a person who knows exactly what he wants and has found that wanting it with the full force of what he was usually sufficient. She was not unmoved. She was also not without fear. She was both. He discovered who she was only later, or only confirmed who he suspected. She was the sixth daughter of the minister of the right, the Oborazukyo, the woman of the misty moon night, the daughter of the most powerful political opponent of everything Genji represented, and she was betrothed to the crown prince, already arranged, already committed, already the property, in the language of the court's arrangements, of someone other than Genji. He came back to find her. A month later, at the wisteria feast at the minister's house, he was there. He had been invited. His political opponents invited him, because his absence would have said something about the arrangement of forces at court that they did not yet want to say. He was there. He drank more than was advisable. He moved through the house in the particular way of a person who has a purpose they are pretending not to have. He found her behind a curtain in the middle of the house. He reached through the curtain and found her hand. She recognized him, or she felt the quality of the reaching, and understood who it was. She did not pull away. This was the dangerous thing. Not that he had come, not that he had found her, but that she had not pulled away, that her hand stayed where it was when his hand was on it, that the Oborazukyo, the woman of the misty moon night, the daughter of the minister of the right, the betrothed of the crown prince, let the hand stay. The tale notes this. It notes it in the way the tale notes the moments that will matter later, the small decisions, the tiny choices that have consequences extending far into the future, far beyond anything the person choosing could have predicted. She did not pull away, and the story moved on. But the hand on the hand, in the curtained room, at the wisteria feast, would return. It would return years later, when its consequences had accumulated into something that could not be ignored. For now it was spring. For now the wisteria was blooming in the minister's garden. For now Genji was young, and everything was possible, and the misty moon night was exactly as beautiful as the song had said it was. The 9th chapter. Aoi, the hollyhock. There is a woman in the story whose name is not given. She is called Aoi, the hollyhock, the Aoi plant of the great festival, a name given to her later by the tradition that named the women of the Genji story after the plants and the seasons that surrounded the moments they were most fully themselves. She was Genji's wife, had been since he was 12, had managed the particular difficulty of being married to someone who was always somewhere else, who came to her house with the frequency of an obligation rather than the frequency of desire, who was known throughout the court as the most beautiful person of his generation, and whose beauty was not directed at her. She managed it with the coolness of someone who has decided that the situation is what it is, and that performing unhappiness about it serves no one. She was not warm with him. He was not warm with her. They were polite. They maintained the form of a marriage. The Heian world asked very little more. In the year she was 22, a great festival was held. The Keimo Festival, the Yaoi Festival, the celebration of spring in the capital. Genji rode in the procession. He was 20 years old. He was at the height of what he was, which was extraordinary by any measure, and in the procession, he was the thing everyone came to see. 2 women came to see him, without knowing they would encounter each other. Aoi came. She was pregnant. She was not well. She had not intended to go, but was persuaded because a woman of her rank, seeing her husband in the procession, was what was done. The Rokuzyo lady came, the woman of the 6th Avenue, Genji's older love, the former wife of the crown prince, the widow of magnificent rank, and education and beauty, whose relationship with Genji had been the most sophisticated of his many relationships, and also the most difficult. She had come in secret, hiding the fact of her carriage, coming to see Genji without anyone knowing that she had come to see him. The particular pride of a woman who knows that being seen, wanting something, diminishes the wanting. The carriages collided, not literally, but in the way that carriages collided at crowded festivals, by competing for the same space, by the servants of each side, insisting on the precedence of their mistress. Aoi's side won, not because of anything Aoi did. She was in her carriage. Her servants acted as servants acted when they believed their mistress had precedence. The Rokuzyo lady's carriage was shoved aside, pushed to the margins, the shafts broken. The carriage that had arrived in secret, now visibly damaged and visibly displaced in front of the crowd that had come to see the procession. The Rokuzyo lady sat in her damaged carriage, and the procession passed, and Genji passed, and he looked at the carriages on the side of the road, but he did not look long enough to understand what had happened. He did not stop. He rode on. She sat in the carriage and felt what she felt. It was not simple anger. She was too intelligent for simple anger. She knew the situation. She knew she was the secret woman. She knew the carriage dispute was the contest of precedence, that it looked like she knew she had lost, but knowing it did not make the feeling smaller. The feeling was its own thing, independent of her intelligence, independent of her understanding, independent of every quality she had that should have made it possible to set it aside. The feeling was there, and it was very large. She began to have strange dreams. She woke from them disturbed, dreams in which she did things she would not do awake, dreams in which the feelings she spent her days managing were not managed, but expressed in forms that frightened her. She smelled the incense of exorcism on her own hair and clothes. The incense burned to drive away spirits. On her, she understood what this meant, or what it might mean, that the part of her she could not control had left her sleeping body and gone where the feeling pointed. Aoi was ill, a serious illness, the kind of illness that in the Heian world was understood to have a spiritual cause, a cause that resided not in the body, but in the relationship between the person and the forces that surrounded the person. The monks and the ascetics were called the rituals of purification and exorcism, the readings and the incantations designed to draw out whatever was in the woman that was not the woman. Genji was there, for the first time in the marriage, truly there, not performing the obligations of a husband, but present, genuinely present, with the particular attention of someone who is watching something they did not expect to lose. Begin to slip. He heard a voice. It came from Aoi, but it was not Aoi's voice. The wrong register, the wrong manner of speaking, a voice that knew Genji in a different way than Aoi knew him, a voice that was saying things Aoi would not say. He knew whose voice it was. He had heard it in lamplight, and in the dark, and in the particular intimacy of early morning departures. He knew every register of it. He knew this one, the Rokuzyo lady's voice, coming out of his wife's body, saying the things that the Rokuzyo lady could not say to him directly, saying them in the room where his wife was dying, or trying not to die. The child was born, a boy, healthy, the first child of the marriage after 8 years, finally arriving. There was a moment in the small time between the birth and what came after, a moment in which Aoi looked at Genji with something in her face that was not the usual cool distance, something that had loosened, something that was perhaps what she had always felt and had never been able to show. He saw it. He received it. He stayed in the room longer than he usually stayed. And then he left. And that night, or a few nights after, Aoi died. The death of the first wife The tale moves through it with the particular respect of a narrative that knows the weight of what it is describing, the rituals, the family's grief, the father's grief, the grief of the household that had been hers, and Genji's grief. He had not loved her in the way the word is usually used. He had not sought her presence, or thought of her with longing, or felt the shape of his day organized around her, but she was gone, and the absence of someone who has always been there has a particular quality that is different from longing. It is the quality of a space, the awareness that something occupied this place and no longer does. He thought about the moment before the end, the loosening in her face, the thing that had not been there before. He thought, I did not know her. Not really. I lived beside her for 8 years, and I did not know her. And now it is too late to know her, and I will spend the rest of my life with the particular weight of what was not done when there was still time. The Rokuzyo lady knew what had happened. She knew when the news came. She had known before the news came, in the way people know things. They do not want to know in the way the body knows. What the mind refuses. She left the city. Her daughter had been named to the sacred position. That required leaving the capital. She used this as the occasion. She went with her daughter to the shrine in the mountains, to the holy place that would take them away from everything that had happened. Genji came to say goodbye to the sacred grove, to the place where she was waiting before the departure. They spoke through the branches of the sacred tree, the conversation of two people who have loved each other and done each other harm and are not going to resolve it, but cannot leave without saying something. She went to Ise. She took her daughter. She left the city and the damaged carriage and the dreams she had been having and the smell of incense that she could not wash away. She left. The 10th chapter, Sakaki, the sacred tree. The emperor was dying. Kiritsubo, the retired emperor, the man who had loved the Kiritsubo lady beyond all prudence, who had wept for her and found Hujitsubo and loved Hujitsubo and been happy in the particular way that people are happy when they find someone who gives them back what they thought they had lost. He was dying quietly, the way the old die, when the body's insistence on continuation has finally exhausted itself. Genji came to him, the father and the son, the emperor who had made every decision that had shaped Genji's life, and the son who had spent that life both inside and outside the shape. Those decisions had made, they talked. The tale does not give us all of it. It gives us the quality of it, the particular intimacy of a man who is dying and his son who is not ready. He died. Everything changed. In the world of the Heian court, Everything was organized around the emperor. The emperor was the center of the appointments, the ceremonies, the distribution of power, the calculation of who was close to whom, and what that proximity meant. When the emperor changed, the center changed. When the old emperor died and the new emperor rose, everything recalibrated. Every position, every relationship, every alliance. The new emperor was Genji's older brother, the son of the Kokiden lady, the son of the woman who had always opposed Genji, who had driven his mother to her death, who had resented his existence from the moment she understood what his existence meant for the prospects of her own son. The Kokiden lady's power grew. The alliance she represented grew. The people who had always been adjacent to power and had been waiting for the arrangement to change, felt the arrangement change, and moved accordingly. Genji's position changed, not immediately, not in ways that could be pointed to directly, but perceptibly, in the small adjustments, the tone of appointments, the angle at which invitations arrived, the sense of being slightly less at the center of the world than he had been. Fujitsubo took her vows. She became a nun. She cut her hair. She took the gray robes of the woman who has turned away from the world toward the hope of something better in what comes after the world. She did this partly for reasons of genuine devotion, partly for reasons of practical strategy. As a nun, she was beyond the usual reach of the court's arrangements. As a nun, she was no longer available to be claimed by anyone. As a nun, she was protected by the same forces that prevented Genji from reaching her. She had been protecting herself from Genji since the night that had produced the child who was now the crown prince. She had been refusing his letters, maintaining the impossible distance, keeping herself on the other side of every boundary the court allowed, and now she put one more boundary between them, the final boundary, the one that the religion provided, the one that even Genji could not find a way around. He came to the house where she was after she had taken her vows. He sat on the outside of the screens. He asked to see her. She refused, as she always refused. He sent poems. She sent back what was appropriate, brief and closed and correct. He sat on the outside of the screen and talked to it. He told it what he felt. He told it the shape of his feeling for the person on the other side. He talked the way people talk when they know they will not be heard in any way that matters. The screen did not answer. He went to the Obarazuki-yo, the misty moon night woman, the daughter of the minister of the right, the woman whose hand he had held through the curtain at the wisteria feast. Her father's house was now the most powerful house in the capital. Her household was the household of the people who had always been his opponents, and he went to her anyway because the love of the impossible was, for Genji, the only love that felt real. She received him. She let him in, the way she had always, in her complicated way, let him in. They were found by her father, by the people whose house this was. The finding was not loud. The Heian court did not do loud things. In these situations, the finding was noted. The finding was a piece of information that could be used at the right moment, in the right way. The right moment would come, the information would be used, but not yet. For now it was simply known, the way things were known in the palace, in the particular silence of people who are aware of something and have not yet decided what to do with it. Genji was 23. His father was dead. His ally in the palace was a nun. His enemy's house held power, and somewhere in the account books of the court's political calculations, someone had written down what had been discovered. The story was moving not toward the place it had been, toward somewhere else, toward the place where the consequences of everything that had happened so far would finally arrive. The 11th chapter, Hanachirusato, the village where flowers fall. There are women in the Genji story who are not defined by their drama. Not all the women lose their composure. Not all of them become spirits, or go into exile, or die at the wrong moment, or refuse to be seen, or fill the rooms with jealousy, or take their vows to prevent what they cannot prevent. Some of them simply receive him. They receive him when he comes. They give him what they have. They are glad when he goes well. They are sorry when he goes poorly. They are not the center of the story in the way that Fujitsubo is the center, or the Rokuzyo lady is the center. They are more like the resting places along a difficult road, the places where a person can stop and be still for a little while before continuing. The woman called Hanachirusato was this, the village where flowers fall, the younger sister of the woman who had been one of the emperor's ladies, a woman of good family, in modest circumstances, managing the decline of a household with the particular grace of someone who does not resent what cannot be helped. Genji visited her infrequently, rarely enough that the visits were always a little surprising, a little like the return of something that had been away long enough to be missed without being expected. He came on a rainy night in early summer, the scent of the orange blossoms, the sound of the cuckoo in the garden, the sisters' rooms quiet, with the particular quiet of a house that has accepted its own smallness. He sat with the older sister and talked about the old days, the days when the palace had been what it was before the emperor died, before the arrangements changed, before the world shifted toward the people who had always been waiting for it to shift. Then he slipped quietly to the younger sister's room, to the woman who was his, in the understated way. She was his, without demands, without the theater of feeling, steadily, reliably, quietly there. When he came to be there, he did not stay long. He never stayed long. He left before the night was finished, but the orange blossoms were still scenting the air. The cuckoo was still calling somewhere in the dark, and whatever the visit had been, it had been enough. It was the kind of enough that the woman of the village where flowers fall had always been willing to accept. The 12th chapter. Suma. The carriage of the minister of the right had been at the right place at the wrong moment. The discovery, the thing written down in the account books of the court's political calculations, the night at the Oborozukio's house, the night that should not have happened, that had happened, that the father of the woman had witnessed and had held in the careful silence of someone waiting for the right moment. The moment had come. The power of the new arrangement pressed against Genji, not all at once, in the measured way. That political pressure applied itself in the Heian world, where nothing was done loudly or in the open, but everything was felt. His position was stripped, his rank was reduced, the appointments that had carried, his income and his standing, were quietly withdrawn. He was not punished formally. Formal punishment would have required formal accusation and formal process, and the people who wanted him diminished did not want the scrutiny of formal process. They wanted the result without the record, and they got it. Genji made his own decision. He would go to Suma, the coast to the west of the capital, the place where exiles went. Not formally exiled, he was not formally exiled, but he would go there as a person who understood what staying would cost, and who had decided that the cost was too high. He went to say goodbye. He went to everyone, the women who held pieces of his life, the friends who had stayed friends, despite the change in the wind, the people whose faces he might not see again for longer than he could predict. He went to Murasaki. She was not his wife in the formal sense. She was not the woman anyone else called his wife, but she was the person whose presence had organized the interior of his life more than anyone else. The girl from the northern hills, the child he had brought to his house, who had grown into the woman she had grown into. She said she wanted to come with him. She said it the way she said things, directly, without artifice, with the clarity of someone who has decided that the true thing is the right thing to say. She said, "Wherever you are going is better than being here without you." He said no, he would not take her to the place of exile. He would not have her in the diminished circumstances of what Suma would be. He left her the house. He left her the estate. He left her the practical arrangements of a life that would continue without him. She wept. He wept. They were not at their best. In this parting, they were people who had not expected to be tested this directly and were finding the test exactly as difficulty always is. He left for Suma, the road to Suma, west along the coast, through the pine forests that the poets had always written about when they wrote about longing, the dark pines of the coast, that were the landscape of feeling separated from what you love. He arrived. The house was modest. The coast was the coast. The sea was gray and constant and indifferent to the question of whether the person watching it was someone of importance or someone who had lost the appearance of importance in the rapid adjustment of a court's calculations. He wrote letters, he drew pictures, he looked at the sea, he thought about Murasaki, he thought about Fujitsubo, and the son who was growing up believing he was someone else's son. He thought about the life he had arranged around himself in the capital, and which was continuing without him in ways he could not see. To no Chujo came. His friend, his rival, his brother-in-law in the complicated way that court relationships produced brothers-in-law. He came through the hostile arrangement of the new power, risking the attention of the people who would note his visit and file it in their accounts. He came anyway. They sat together on the coast. They ate and drank and talked in the way of friends who do not have many hours and spend the hours they have saying the things they would have said if they had had more time to be less direct. Then Tunochujo left, the road back to the capital, the life that continued there, the appointments and the ceremonies and the calculations that did not pause. For the absence of Genji. Genji watched him go, and the coast was the coast again. The sea, the pines, the indifferent persistence of things that do not require anyone to watch them. The storm came. Not a usual storm, not the storms of the coast that were common and expected, and that a person living by the sea learned to anticipate and manage. A storm of the kind that the Heian world understood as an expression of something beyond the weather, the sky doing what the sky does when the accumulated forces of the invisible world have reached a pressure that requires release, lightning, thunder that did not stop, the sea rising, the house shaking, the servants frightened, and the frightened servants, frightening Genji more than the storm itself. His father appeared to him, the Kiritsubo emperor, not clearly, not in the way of a person present in the room, but present in the way of the people who appear in the dream that is also waking, who carry information from somewhere beyond the ordinary. He said, "Leave this place." He said it with the urgency of a father who has been watching from wherever fathers go when they are no longer available to help directly. Leave this place. Follow the guidance of the god of the sea. The storm passed, and from Suma came a message from a man called the Akashi novice, a former governor of the province who had left the court and made a life on the coast of Akashi, who had a daughter who had dreamed of this moment for most of his life. Come to Akashi, the message said. Come when you are ready. The crossing is not far. The 13th chapter. Akashi. Akashi. The name means bright, clear, the quality of light, on a certain kind of coast, at a certain kind of hour when the sea is calm, and the sky is the particular blue that makes a person feel that things might be all right. Genji crossed from Suma to Akashi, a short distance, a different world. The Akashi novice had built a life there. That was not the life of ambition. He had been at court. He had held positions. He had understood at some point that the position was not the point, and had stepped away from the position and built something else. What he had built was a family, a place, a set of preparations for a possibility he had been waiting for. He believed something would happen at Akashi. He had believed it for years. He had shaped his whole life around the belief and the preparations for it. He had a daughter, the Akashi lady, a woman of extraordinary refinement for someone living far from the capital, educated, musical, the product of a father who had decided that if what he was waiting for was ever going to arrive, it would require the most prepared person he could produce. Genji resisted. He was not interested in the provincial daughter of the retired governor. He was at Akashi because of the storm and the message. He was not at Akashi because he was looking for another attachment. The Akashi novice was persistent, with the persistence of someone who has been waiting a long time, and who is not going to let a slight reluctance stand between him and the thing he has been preparing for. He arranged for Genji to hear the koto. The koto, the Japanese harp, played in the room beyond the one where Genji sat, played by someone who was not playing for an audience, but for herself, in the way the best playing always happens, without the self-consciousness that an audience requires. He heard it. He heard it the way a musician hears music, played by someone as good as they are, with the particular recognition of meeting something at its own level. The koto said what the koto said. What it said was that the person playing it was someone the coast of Akashi had no right to contain. He went to her. The Akashi lady. She was not like the women of the capital. She was too aware of the difference between herself and the man who had come to her province to be entirely comfortable, too aware of his rank, too aware of her own position relative to his, too proud in her own way to pretend that the gap did not exist, but she was also the person who had played the koto, and the koto had told him what the koto told him. They came together with the particular mixture of attraction and awkwardness that happens when two people who are both aware of the distance between them close that distance anyway. He was at Akashi for months. He thought about Murasaki. He wrote to Murasaki. He told her as much as he could tell about what was happening, which was not everything, which was shaped by what he thought she could hear and what he thought could wait. Murasaki was in the capital, managing the house he had left her, managing the absence, with the particular dignity of someone who had decided that dignity was what she had. She wrote back. Her letters were the letters of a woman who missed him, but was not going to say so in a way that could be used to diminish her. The gap between them was not only the distance between Akashi and the capital, it was also the Akashi lady who was now present in his life in a way that Murasaki could feel without being told. Then the summons came from the capital, from the new emperor's people, or from the arrangement of forces that made up the new emperor's situation. The balance had shifted. The Kokiden lady was ill. The power she had held was loosening its hold. The crown prince, the child of Fujitsubo and the hidden truth, was growing toward his majority. The people around him were beginning to understand what his majority would mean for the arrangement of things. The summons came. Return, it said. The conditions that had sent Genji away were no longer what they had been. The return was not a defeat for his enemies. The enemies were managing their own defeats. Without Genji's assistance, he prepared to leave Akashi. The Akashi lady was expecting his child. She did not know yet what the child would be. She knew what she was feeling about the departure, the feeling of having been the person who held what she held for the months he was there, and now holding the leaving. He made his promises, the promises that were real, and that he would keep, not all of them in the ways she hoped, but the substance of them, the care and the acknowledgement would be kept. He left, the coast of Akashi behind him, the road back to the capital ahead, the years of exile over, the life that had continued without him, waiting to continue with him again. He was going home. For the second time in the story, a Genji was going home toward the folded mountains of Yamato. But this Genji had not become a bird. He had become something else, something that years of distance, and the sea, and the koto in the next room, and the letters in both directions, had made of him. Something more than what he had left as, something the capital did not yet know. It was going to have to reckon with